For 18 years, the mystery of what happened to Madeleine McCann has never been solved.
Madeleine McCann's disappearance rates with the Lindbergh baby as, the disappearance of a child that has caught the public's imagination for these many, many years. I think we will always wonder what happened to her.
The distraught parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, pleading for help to find their daughter. Their story sympathetic to so many and creating an outpouring of support.
It's been much, much greater than we could ever possibly have imagined, and we've had a huge amount of public support and goodwill.
To this day, nothing, no body has ever been found, no confirmed sightings. But just this week, renewed hope for answers as a massive search effort launched in the area where Madeleine went missing all those years ago. The case struck a nerve from the very beginning. The story instantly became a media frenzy, covered in the news around the world. From ITV.
The Portuguese police have been searching throughout the day.
And Sky News.
We're just hearing that a search is underway for a 3-year-old British girl.
To ABC News Australia years later.
This is how she might look today.
Celebrities like David Beckham got involved, making a Spanish TV appearance to plead for help.
If you have seen this little girl.
The McCanns even met the then Pope, who blessed Madeleine's picture.
Within days of Madeleine's disappearance, her family orchestrated a campaign to find her. Thousands of leads poured in, and those leads still continue to come in.
Madeleine's parents speaking to GMA in 2011.
All I can say is how much that I love Madeleine. We both love our children dearly, and there was no way we'd ever have put them at risk.
ABC News reached out to the McCanns, but did not hear back. For days, teams of German and Portuguese authorities using ground-penetrating radar, telling ABC News they're focusing on multiple sites around a home where a man German investigators are calling a suspect used to stay. The search taking on a new urgency as that suspect, Christian Brueckner, could be released from jail in the fall. A convicted child sex offender, he's currently behind bars for the rape of a 72-year-old American woman. Brueckner denies all allegations against him and has not been charged in Madeleine's case and says he has nothing to do with her disappearance.
I'm Mathew Steeples, the Steeple Times. I write and do a bit of other stuff like talk TV from time to time, and I have a little show on the YouTube, and I generally talk about true crime cases, but I talk about politics, and the Steeple Times is not just about one thing, it's about a whole array of topics and all sorts of craziness. We have all sorts of wonderful contributors like Stephen Burkhoff, the actor. We've had people like Frankie Dettori in the past, all sorts of people. So there we go. That's me. With regard to the recent funding given to Madeleine McCann's operation, the Operation Grange, another 100 and something thousand was given. 100,000 doesn't actually I actually was corrected when I was last on Talk TV, because I was complaining and saying how ridiculous, they shouldn't be given any more money. But Martin Brandt of Sky News rightly did point out that actually 100,000 doesn't get you very far, because a police officer costs 40,000 each. So it's a drop in the ocean. But the problem is the grand total. The grand total is over £13 million wasted now on this ridiculous charade, and it has got nowhere. Why not reallocate the resources to other missing children? Why do other people get no help, no attention? They get nothing at all, and the McCanns get million upon million when clearly there is absolutely no evidence of what happened to this child. There is no evidence in relation to this Christian Brueckner. They have spent, 5 years going over Christian Brueckner, now panicking because he will get out of prison for his unrelated offences. He has never been conclusively linked to McCann. Yes, he has said cryptic, stupid things. He is a clear megalomaniac. He is a monster. He's revolting. He did terrible things to an 80-year-old woman. He did terrible things to a student. But his victim profile is quite different to that of missing Madeleine, if Madeleine is indeed missing. And as Giancarlo Amaral, who successfully sued the McCanns for libel, pointed out, all of these places have been searched before, and last week's search was inconclusive. Let me find my little page, because now I've moved out here. Yes, the latest search has found nothing. The direction of Hans Walters, this is what forget his name. I met him at this crime conference. He's involved with Michelle Mone. His name I forget. Anyway, he said direction of Hans Walters is fixated. It's got no evidence to support. Ignored much of the evidence that could have actually been used. You know, the English, German police didn't get involved. The English police, the Portuguese police didn't get involved in this. This was about the Germans who are trying to, you know, keep this man in a jail. The Germans are convinced of murder, but you know, they haven't proven any of it. It's not possible because there's no evidence. It doesn't exist. There's no breakthrough. The chances are very slim. He said, I'm trying to recall his name, but he was involved in the Nicola Bully case. He's a very busy ex-police officer. I can't say he's great. He was very involved with Jimmy Savile. I forget. Anyway, his name escapes me. But anyway, you know, how many other cases could have been solved with the McCann millions? That's what I say. I just think it's an outrage.
There's absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead.
But then you hear
let me finish, please. There's absolutely no evidence that Madeleine is dead, and there's absolutely no evidence that we were involved in her disappearance. Well, that is the conclusion.
Let me finish.
That is the conclusion of the process, and that's what we're here debating. The conclusions of the process versus the conclusions of the book.
So
they are not the same.
The conviction of the inspectors.
Why would we be shocked? We're not denying the existence. Why would we be shocked? We're not denying the existence of the dogs or anything else. It's evidence we're interested in. There is no evidence that Madeleine is dead.
Jerry,
that is what you heard yesterday. You heard that, didn't you?
This is just raking up old ground, isn't it, Jerry?
No. Today we are here.
But the police...
No, hang on. They're not raking up. This is a legal...
It's nothing new, you're right.
This is a legal process that we're going through to protect our daughter and our family.
But there's nothing new being said by the police,
Of course there's not. And that's the point. You know, we're looking for new information to help the search. The question, of course, is who is looking for Madeleine, who has been looking for Madeleine over the last 2 years, and that is us in our investigation team.
It's really just been the team working together. I mean, obviously it's been quite tough. There's been a lot of miles and a lot of climbing, and there's obviously highs and lows and that. And the fact that we've all worked together so well, and I think we all know why we're here. You know, we know it's for such a good cause, and that just keeps you going. Yeah, I know this won't help Madeleine. But I'd hate to think that any other child would have to go through this, and their family would have to go through what we've been through. So, although Madeleine has been very much on my mind through this, I know that is helping lots of other children. So, and I think we all feel like that. I think everybody's thinking like that as well. So.
Well, you know, going on a bike ride is not going to help her child, but she is raising attention about her child. I do think that you know, they became more and more obsessed as they went along with the parties, the media things, because their life has changed. You know, they had, you know, a lady who I knew of, who I had a lawsuit with myself. She was called Lady Mayor. She's now Baroness Mayor in her own right. Her husband is dead. He was ambassador to Washington, and she claimed her children were abducted by her ex-husband. And, you know, they told me something quite to the contrary. And I helped her charity. That's how I became involved with the McCanns. And the McCanns became obsessed with when we went to Downing Street. Theresa May gave them receptions because of Baroness Mayo, who happened to be the dresser of Theresa May. These people all became part of their lives. They've become elevated into a different world, and that has become the focus. The child has been forgotten. They're not really talking. The child disappeared 18 years ago. The child is not coming back. It doesn't exist. I don't believe the child exists myself. I don't believe the child existed since the night of it were happening, to be honest, because the cat of our dogs sensed the death in the cupboard. The cat of our dogs sensed the death in the car. The cat of our dogs, the curtains, the blood spatter, all the things that were supposedly going on. They just indicate to me that this is a complete waste of time. Reallocate the resources. These two, they've made it their mission to become. I don't blame them if they're innocent, and they could be completely innocent. This is a possibility. There are a number of possibilities. Nobody can say what happened categorically, and that's what I've always said. We don't know. Anybody who comes up with a theory, it could be a load of old rot. There are a number of questions that I continually ask about, what happened on that night and what happened in the days after. But I don't have the answers, and nor does anybody else. So that's where we stand on that. So with regard to what she talks about the child in the past tense, sometimes people, slip up in the way they use words. We all say silly things, but she does it rather a lot. Yes, I will agree. The McCanns and the truth or the lies of what they have come out with. There are many incidents of very curious moments with the McCanns. Obviously, I have met the McCanns on several occasions, always in a social setting. But I have never asked them any questions about what happened to their child. But I have seen the reaction of Dr. McCann, male, Jerry, and I find the man very aggressive and as if, he's trying to hide something. I find her very weak, as if she's trying to protect something. That is my personal experience of them. But with regard to interviews, there were 48 questions put to them in the first, few hours of the investigation by the Portuguese police, and they refused and declined to answer those questions. If they had answered those questions, maybe something could have been done. Maybe something could have happened that could have found this child if it was genuinely missing. Whether the child is genuinely missing or not, nobody will ever know. I cannot say whether this child is alive or dead, and nor can anyone else. So everybody who comes out on the internet and has a little theory, all these conspiracy theorists who write to me, Madeleine was taken to the moon, Madeleine was taken by Ghislaine Maxwell. It's all a load of old rot. It's absolute nonsense. Just because there was a lady, here we go, now the naughty bird is making a noise. Keith does like to make a noise. The 48 questions, why wouldn't they answer them? Why would the Tapas group not answer the questions? The Tapas group have been very uncooperative. And they've tried to make out the Portuguese police are incompetent, but it was not British. It wasn't Portuguese dogs that scented the death in the cupboard, the death in the car, etc., etc. They were British police dogs. So if you want to blame anyone, blame your Operation Grange, Jerry and Kate. The McCanns, I do not blame them for if they are innocent people. I think they should have been charged with child neglect. I've said that all along. I think the way they left their 3 children unattended is inappropriate. They paid for childcare during the day but didn't pay for it at night. Why? Bit weird. Why did they leave the door open? Why did they change the story about the door? They have been inconsistencies. Obviously, when your child goes missing, you are going to go into a state of panic, and you will say things that you get mixed up about because, you're in a state of panic. But there have been too many inconsistencies, I would say, with Jerry and Kate McCann. There is something not quite correct about the way they handled it. And of course, the British media was flown out, and the Peter Mandelson lot were all sent out there just to help them, and Jim Gamble of the child protection thing, and they got all the help. Esther McVeigh, who later became a Conservative MP, and all the rest of it. And I knew Esther quite well when she was on GMTV or whatever it was called. I met her with Sally Farmerlow, who was in Howard's Way and all of that at Conservative things long, long ago. And then she became an MP and married an MP, and she had an affair with another MP, and da-da-da-da-da. And then she had she was their spokesman for a while. They had everybody helping them. So they had guidance. So they should have been a lot more careful in their use of words. Why did they go and play tennis in the days that after the child went missing? Why did they go and have the risotto with the known, offender? Why did they go off with Clement Freud? And she references it in the book. They had a risotto and strawberry vodka shots. Why was all this going on? Not focused on. Why were they focused on this child? It was as if the child was set. It was always in the book. When we met the Pope, when we met Obama, when we did this, when we were on NetJets, and that is what I find rather curious. But it's rather like with the Menendez brothers, and I know a lot about their case. They bought Rolex watches and bought a restaurant. When people react differently to grief. And okay, they lied and they were very naughty and they have admitted what they did, and their sentence has been brought down to manslaughter now, and they will be out of prison hopefully soon. And they should not have killed their parents. But equally, the McCanns, it's a case of strange behavior. But if I were to do such a thing would happen to me tomorrow, somebody disappeared and whatever, and I'm in a state of panic, you never know how you're going to react. You think of the case of Sophie Toscan de Plantier, the lady murdered in Ireland, allegedly by the British journalist. And he was like the village freak and weird, but nobody ever, the French convicted him, but he was never extradited, so he never actually served the sentence. And then he took up making these podcasts about, what went on there, and that was his version of events. Now, who knows what the truth is? The truth is always stranger than fiction. So in some ways, the McCann's behavior, maybe, they just wanted an escape. I don't know. But I just think their behavior was a little odd. And their version of the story did change quite a bit at the beginning. So, yes, I think the McCanns have not been wholly honest about what went on. The McCanns, there is an allegation that, the McCanns used sedatives on their children. Whether they did or not, I don't know, but that was widely discussed. There's all sorts of things that could be questioned. But my question that I find most bizarre is, why did a middle-class couple who were both doctors, well-earning people, why did they leave their children unattended? If they were working class, and I don't believe in the class system. I think we're all middle class now. There's either the super elite or the underclass. That's about it. Everybody else is in the middle. We've all merged because of, people can buy their council house and all the rest. The doctors McCann are upper middle class, if you want to put it in any sphere. They had the money to pay for childcare, but they chose not to. And that door did not open into the resort even. It opened onto a road. So if anybody wanted to take the child, they would have been able to easily. And the door was wide open. And equally, I don't understand why, if somebody did take the child, why they didn't take the other two children. The other two children did not have the distinguishing eye feature, and the distinguishing eye feature makes that child easily identifiable. If that child is really still alive, and of course, my belief is that child died, long ago, because with all this money floating around, somebody would have traded in the people who had taken it, because it's rather like with any situation with criminality. Criminals, if they do things as a group, and obviously it would have taken more than one person to orchestrate, selling this child to somebody or whatever happened. Somebody along the way would see the reward. The Sun newspaper alone offered £2.5 million as a reward. Somebody would have traded in somebody else, because criminals always turn on one another in the end. That is always what happens. They have no loyalty because that's why they're criminals. They are not people who live by the law. So that's where I feel about that. Anybody in this situation would feel regret. Regret, obviously, is we shouldn't have left the children alone if they are innocent, and one has to presume them innocent until something is proven otherwise. But honestly, I think those two people should have paid for childcare. They didn't. Now that is a huge mistake. And I have many friends who have said to me, well, we left our children alone when we went out for a drink at the bar around the corner. But it wasn't exactly around the corner. There were a load of trees in between. There was a road, and, the door was open onto the road. The neighbor heard crying the day before. The child was distressed the night before. And it doesn't make sense. The whole thing doesn't make sense. And obviously the way she communicates is very odd, but I don't buy that much into that. I think that's just simple mistakes, but I'm not really that obsessed about, whether she uses the present tense, the past tense, or the future tense, or whatever. But what I find odd is that they could afford to have paid to look after their children and they didn't bother. And I think that is a disgrace, because other people are prosecuted for far less. The little old lady who doesn't pay for a TV license gets locked up and thrown in jail. But Bernie Ecclestone, he doesn't pay £700 million in taxes, and he gets, 2 years suspended jail sentence, not even a tag, nothing. The treatment of people depends on who you are and what your connections are. And that is completely wrong. The law should be unitary. It should be applied to everybody.
She's a real character. She's got loads of personality. I mean, obviously, it's nearly a couple of years since I've seen her, but for someone so young, I just thought she was quite amazing.
And you know it.
Clap your hands.
And it's obviously quite hard thinking about it, sorry. She was just really good company, just... She's like my little friend sort of all the time.
Today marks the second day of a new police search for Madeleine McCann. German and Portuguese police forces scoured a derelict barn in a race against time to gather evidence. The prime suspect in the case, Christian Brueckner, is due to be released later this year after serving a 7-year sentence for raping an American tourist.
Well, I will say the derelict barn or farmhouse or cottage or whatever you want to call it had already been searched, and Giancarlo Amaral did point out at the time that they are wasting their resources. They could have done all of this with an aeroplane. It could all have been done from the air. They did not need to be doing all this. And what have they found?
Portugal. Now, police fear that it will just leg it if they can't charge him with something else in time. But we are joined now from Portugal by our very own GB News national reporter, Charlie Peters, who's not only just been following this, but also has, well, frankly, an astonishing exclusive to bring to us. So, Charlie, I'll throw it over to you.
Well, good evening, Patrick. You join me in Praia de Luz. This is the resort town where Madeleine McCann went missing 18 years ago. But a few miles to the east earlier today, we were watching as German and Portuguese authorities were conducting that second day of searches. They did deploy an excavator, a JCB digger, and also a geoscanner to assess the ground, looking around those dilapidated buildings where the prime suspect, Christian Brueckner, is said to have a connection, and where potentially that key forensic evidence could be to finally link him.
Well, What I would like to say in response to that is Christian Brueckner lived in that farmhouse until 2006. Madeleine McCann went missing on the 3rd of May 2007. The connection to that farmhouse is very tenuous, and he rented it, he didn't own it. He was a drifter by the time of Madeleine's disappearance. He wasn't living there, so I don't think that property has any connection to the matter at all.
A prime suspect to the disappearance and murder of Madeleine McCann. But it is as we were leaving that search area in Italia, a couple miles away from here, that we spoke to a man who came up to us and he wanted to speak to GB News, called Ken Ralphs, who was saying that the German and Portuguese authorities were in completely the wrong area because he had met with that suspect, Christian Brueckner, and a potential alleged accomplice 1 week before Maddie went missing. Here's what he said to us earlier today.
He introduced me to Christian, told me it was his best friend, and we invited him, come and have a drink with me and his accomplice, because I was friendly with his accomplice, who we took food to help him and his children. And then he started to cry and confess that he was going to get involved with Brueckner to take a child from Praia da Luz, which I just thought was, crazy to hear that. And he told me he'd done all the planning, Christian knew what he was doing, and I just said, you want to stay away from these people. Stay the hell out. And he cried that he needed the money to get out of this country with his children and his family, and that's why he was getting involved with Brueckner to steal a child. So Brueckner was coming out with his cronies, and they was going to stay at a property and a house in a speech. Now that property is the last place where Brueckner stayed, because the person who owned the house went back to Germany, so he was left on his own there with the accomplice who I was camping with. And the bottom line is that's where they need to be searching. For over 18 years, I've pressed the police, I've told them, and all they can do is blame one another for not passing this information on. So that's why I've turned up today, because I am sick to death of it going in one ear and out the other. I'm sick to death of the Portuguese.
Ken Ralphs is a very unreliable witness. On the program I did on Talk TV, Martin Brunt, Sky News, and another detective, we spoke about Ken Ralphs. Ken Ralphs is somebody who is an attention seeker. He is not. It's not an exclusive. He's spoken many times. GB News have got it wrong yet again. Well done, GB News.
There's any information, and I'm sick to death of Scotland Yard lying to me.
Yes. Well, there we go. There is no exclusive going on there. It's a total load of rubbish. Typical GB News. Charlie Peters, whoever you are, go back to journalism school. You're really not very bright. In terms of journalistic reaction, I speak often with people from The Guardian, from the Daily Telegraph, from the Daily Mail, particularly the Daily Mail. I have daily conversations with the Daily Mail. I've done a lot of work with the Daily Mail on various things. I know everyone hates them. I've done work with The Sun. I do work with Talk TV. Obviously, Talk TV is where I've done most about Madeleine McCann. But what I would say is every single journalist I speak to thinks that this is a complete charade. It's ridiculous. Why not allocate the resources to children that can be found? I deal with the case of a friend of mine. I've never met the man, but I've become connected with him, called Kevin Allen. His brother Martin Allen went missing in 1979, the son of a chauffeur from an embassy in Kensington, ordinary working people. And, before she died, the mother went on Radio 4 and she said, nobody cares about my child because my child, was a nobody and poor. And the last time it was seen, the person who looked like it was abducting it, what looked rather like a conservative politician who was subsequently linked to the Elm Guest House. So people like that get no help. I've spoken with many other missing people. There are plenty of other cases. Obviously, Kerry Needham and Ben Needham, that is one that I know a lot about. Again, no help. She had to do it all for herself, and she's a real trooper. She goes out there and she keeps fighting, but she doesn't get any help like they do. It's totally wrong.
Yeah, you're completely right. Okay, now let me hear any points that you've made on the case that you wanna raise, and don't start it with my final thoughts or anything like that because of how I might edit this together. But just say I've got a few, and I'd also I don't know, you know what you're doing. Just segue yourself in if you know what I'm saying. But you're doing bloody great, mate. Honestly.
Okay, right.
Don't worry, I've still got some questions left for you. I just I know when Mathew Steeples comes armed with a notebook, it's like fucking watching a Navy SEAL team.
Well, I'll begin. I'll give you a little snippet.
Yes.
So, why is it, I ask, that it's always in June that the police decide to descend on Praia de Luz? Why is it that these police officers seem to like going down there? And, one year they were photographed playing golf. It becomes one big charabang, a great holiday for these people. And it is not correct that public resources are being wasted in this manner when there are genuine people who can be found. The Germans are focused on one thing. Hans Christian Walters is absolutely obsessed with Christian Brueckner. Christian Brueckner was first accused in the first of the lockdowns. He was a very convenient patsy. Christian Brueckner is a revolting, evil man. Don't get me wrong. I will not say anything positive about him. Just look at his disgusting face, and he's got that scar down his face. Obviously, he upset somebody in prison. We don't know quite what happened there. He's recently complained that his ribs were broken and all the rest of it. But this does not mean that he is the person responsible for Madeleine McCann. He is responsible. He was convicted for what he did to an 80-year-old woman. He was convicted of other crimes, multiple crimes, but that does not make him the person responsible for Madeleine McCann. No evidence has been found, and they are so desperate. The Germans, this man, Walters, he is going to be very embarrassed if this man gets out of the prison, because, of course, once Christian Brueckner gets out of prison, Christian Brueckner will be off on on a plane, even though he's supposedly broke. This is another interesting point, is that Christian Brueckner may not get out of prison in September because he's claiming to be broke. If he does not pay his traffic fines, which amount to about $1,500 or €1,500 or whatever it is, they will keep him until January. So he could be there till January. That's their maximum they've got him until, because if he doesn't pay, they will keep him longer. But he's claiming not to have money because, he's a deviant. Of course he's got money. He must have somebody somewhere. He had cars. Sell the cars. Get someone to deal with that for you. He must have somebody helping him. He is a nasty piece of toe rag. Vile and evil and rotten and wrong, but that does not make him necessarily the person who took Madeleine McCann. And Christian Walters is fixated upon him at the cost of investigating other things. And I think that the German police should keep out of this from henceforth, because they've proven nothing, absolutely nothing. It's nothing to do with him at this stage, because the evidence isn't there. Either he is a genius and he is, the wicked James Bond villain type character who, has managed to inveigle everybody, or he's just the patsy because he's just the local monster. And people like this Mr. Ralphs, it suits him because he gets paid for his little interviews, doesn't he? So he loves doing this because it tops up his pension fund. With regard to Christian Brueckner's future, I think Christian Brueckner will leave prison. I don't know when Christian Brueckner will leave prison, whether it's September or January. I think somebody will pay his bill for him because he has a fan club. These nasty people, the Myra Hindley fan club. I went to a dinner party once in Hackney in London, and I was seated next to a lady who happened to be Lord Longford's secretary. She is one of the most awful women I've ever encountered, and I still encounter her now and again because she goes to the Chelsea Arts Club and she steals all the newspapers and won't let anybody read them. She's a right stingy old bag. And she sat there and proceeded to tell me what a lovely, kind lady Myra Hindley was. Now, there are people out there who write letters to Christian Brueckner. Christian Brueckner has a fan club. It's ridiculous. All of these people do. You know, the Soham killer, any of them, they all have fans. Now, in some instances of certain people who are involved in criminal cases, obviously there are people who believe they're innocent, but there are also people who just want to be groupies. You know, they want to marry a prisoner or whatever. It's very odd behavior. And somebody, I think, will pay his fine, and I think he will leave in September, and he will go to South America or wherever he can't be. He'll have to go to somewhere he can't be extradited to Europe or Great Britain. That is the key thing he needs to do.
No, never. And, you know, there's nothing with any logic that could, you know, you would have to start with why, you know, how, when, who, and there's just simply, you know, the answer to any of these things is there's nothing to suggest anything. So, no, that's an emphatic no.
There are a lot of obsessives with this case. You know, there are people who have been prosecuted for pestering the McCanns, and I think it is completely inappropriate to harass them because until anything is proven, you know, they're innocent people. So, no, they're just people who lost their child, but okay, they should be held. I do believe they should have been held responsible for why they lost their child, but that doesn't mean that they caused the loss of the child. We cannot conclude anything until a body is found or a child is found. And obviously, Ron, you have your connection with the young lady, who I won't name, but, you know, she has her theory about who she is, and that's up to her. And there's another American child who believes that she is also the same person. And there have been many others. And, you know, but the McCanns should be left to in peace. People shouldn't go around banging on their door, harassing them. But equally, I do think that the police should have actually handled the matter in a different way and prosecuted them for what they did over their neglect of their children, because they neglected not only one child, they neglected 3 children because they left the children unattended, as did the rest of the Tapas group. They should also have been prosecuted.
They'd hoped the answers to an 18-year-old mystery were hidden somewhere inside these walls. Derelict buildings picked apart by more than 60 investigators over 3 days. Today, the renewed search for Madeleine McCann was called off early. This is the first look inside the search zone. Much of the focus was here, an excavator churning up the soil at a site frequented by the prime suspect. Christian Brueckner was known to camp on the coastal scrubland during the time the British toddler vanished from her family holiday apartment. German authorities believe the convicted sex offender is the culprit due to claims by key witnesses and circumstantial evidence. This search considered a last-ditch effort to prove it with DNA before Brueckner is released from prison as early as September and disappears. Throughout these ruins are the signs of a meticulous search, down to markings on the floor of the ground-penetrating radar that's been scanning deep into the Portuguese soil to no avail. Portuguese police say no items of significance were found, only animal bones and adult clothing. But this search is led by German prosecutors who've yet to say if soil samples will be taken away for testing. Hope for a major breakthrough in ruins. In Portugal, Jacqueline Robson, 7 News.
Why did this search not occur in February, for example? Because now we are in June. May, June, you know, the vegetation has grown. It makes it much harder to do the searching. So why did they choose to do it now? That is a very key point to me because, you know, they all wanted to go on a holiday. They all wanted to go on a jolly, didn't they? That is what this is about. This is disgraceful behavior by the German police. The Portuguese police said, we don't want anything to do with this, but we will cooperate. That is their answer, you know, and that is just wrong. So that's that. Okay, my next point will be he will flee Germany on release. He will not be staying in Germany, and he will be gone, and then that will be the end of the matter. I don't know about the bones, but bits of clothing, you know, the area where Christian Brueckner was living was full of drifters and, crazy people who lived in tents, and they were all mad, and they all did all sorts of strange things. So, the things they left behind there would have been all sorts of weird stuff. I don't know, but they were weird drug addict people. Maybe some of them died. I don't know. I have no idea. I can't possibly comment. I don't know. With regards to the stories that get published about Madeleine McCann in the newspapers, I talked about this on Talk TV. Every time there is a sighting of Madeleine McCann, it is unknown person spots Madeleine McCann in a supermarket, but then doesn't tell the police for 6 months. And then, well, obviously it's too late. So these are silly little stories that are fed out there to keep the urge for the Operation Grange to be funded. They are fake news. It's a load of rubbish because they never are sourced. I have a situation with a very famous owner of a football club who has done some very, very bad things to lots of ladies, and he is a nasty pornographer as well. I'm not going to name him because it's sort of subject to a slap order, and if I do, I'll get sued, and you will get sued. But everybody knows who this person is, and I've got photographs of him coming in and out of the police station, and I've got this lady that writes to me. But she uses a pseudonym, and she writes to me via Twitter, and she also writes to my friend at the Daily Mail, and both of us have said the same thing to her. And she doesn't get it, silly woman, because we don't know who she is. I think she's probably a former secretary or something of his, but she won't say who she is, and therefore her evidence isn't credible. All of these people in this McCann story are German tourists. And the last one last week was this drunken couple. One was English and one was German, and they used to get drunk every night. So that's the way they're going to say they're not reliable. But they're both dead now. But they came out with all sorts of theories about Christian B. But why are they only being quoted now they're dead? They're totally unreliable. And a dead witness is unreliable. It's like you can't sue a dead person. You can say whatever. Once someone's dead, you can say, oh, nasty paedophile, like people did about Jimmy Savile, whatever. They didn't say it when he was alive because they knew he'd sue, even though, the evidence was pretty clear. But there we go. That is how it works. The system works to protect all this nonsense, but it's always, unknown couple spotted Madeleine in supermarkets, or we saw her on a yacht in Gibraltar. We saw her with Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine can't exactly fight back against the story. Ghislaine has nothing to do with this. I don't like Ghislaine, as you all know, but Ghislaine is not the person. Okay, one person in an e-fit looked like Ghislaine, but that does not mean Ghislaine was the person, because what would have Ghislaine wanted with a 3-year-old child? Ghislaine didn't even like children. I don't buy into the conspiracy theory that the McCanns were that connected before things happened. There are lots of theories out them being connected to the Dunblane killer and all this nonsense. Seriously, no. They were doctors. They were respectable middle-class people. They came from, well, he came from Glasgow. She had connections in Liverpool. They certainly knew people, but I don't believe in the huge conspiracy of them being, like some kind of Freemasons and all the rest of it. Whether he could have been, I don't know. But they were supported initially because I believe there was a mood in the nation for a case of this type. So, I've spoken with, my friend was Charlie Brooks, who was married to Rebecca Brooks, who ran The Sun. Every generation, there is a story in a newspaper. The previous story was Jamie Bulger. There is a story that basically causes outrage in the nation. Jamie Bulger, 2 horrible little 10-year-old vile, feral, disgusting, evil people decided to throw battery acid in a poor little toddler's eyes and then chuck him on a railway track and do all the terrible things they did to that poor boy. And that outraged the nation. That story had kind of run its course. And Madeleine McCann vanishing, little blonde toddler who vanishes in a Portuguese, British people love to go to the Algarve. They love to go to, Marbella and Menorca and, Costa del Crime, as I call it, and all the rest. And that child, the photograph, it outraged the nation. So naturally, the media seized upon this. And that is why that story took off. It would not have taken off if it had been, a little black child from a council estate. It would not have had the same reaction. I can guarantee you that. It's, ordinary middle class family have their child stolen. That is why it happened. And the reason I think it also happened was the period of government. So it was the end of Tony Blair's government before the beginning of Gordon Brown's. And they wanted something to distract from the transition, and it rather suited the government. That's why Peter Mandelson got so involved. And this is, it was the timing. The timing worked for the story, and the story has never gone away. It's the perfect, so Boris Johnson used the story during the first lockdown. The first 2 weeks of the lockdown, it was chaos. The country was in chaos. People were outraged. I just read a letter today by Frederick, one of Frederick Forsyth's last letters. And Freddie was a brilliant journalist, brilliant writer. And he wrote to the Telegraph and said, it's ridiculous, this lockdown. It's completely crazy. It's an overreaction, da-da-da-da-da. Well, meanwhile, Boris Johnson's spinning around. And, meanwhile, Carrie's living a La Vida Loca and, dancing to ABBA with a little... Henry Newman, her little gay best friend, and we've got all that going on. So, it was the perfect story again in 2020 to distract from the COVID crisis. It's Madeleine McCann is brought up again and again with unknown witness says this. It's never a sourced thing other than Mr. Ralph's, and there's a couple of those types. Most of those people have been totally discredited, and quite frankly, GB News, you should do better. Go and do some research before you get out world exclusive on Ken Ralph's, Ken Rotbag, more like. Honestly, terrible. So, I do think that the Madeleine McCann story is a story that sadly is used for distraction in the press.
I cannot love Madeleine more than I love her. I would never have taken a risk. It was something that wasn't even a decision. That's how safe it felt,
What
and it didn't
information
help.
did we have to suggest it wasn't going to be safe? We were dining 50 yards away. We were making regular checks. We were going into the apartment, always quiet, every night. And if we had thought it was unsafe for a minute, if there was any conscious element that somebody was going to go into that apartment and steal your child, then of course we wouldn't have done that.
But it wasn't just a matter of being unsafe, was it? Is it the case? You can clear it up right here now. Was Madeleine upset the night before about being left alone? Had she had a moment and got out of bed and started crying and started looking for him?
I don't want to dwell on it too much. I don't know if you saw the documentary last night, so I have talked about it. Madeleine made a comment in passing that where were you when I cried? Not just to Mummy, by the way, just generally. It just seemed a bit odd. It was a very kind of passing remark, and we just thought she doesn't usually wake up, and she woke up, that means that, she must have fallen back asleep very quickly. And then she moved on. She moved on.
Anybody with young children will understand that children cry, they wake up at night. During that week, there was one night, and we can't give too much detail because it's part of the investigation film, but there was one night when Madeleine had come through and one of the other twins was crying. So, and when she did mention it to us and we asked her about it, and she just dropped, she was completely fine. And we thought, was it when they were bathing, getting them, first putting them down in that period when they're really tired? Of course, with hindsight, in the context of what happened, of Madeleine being abducted, it's put in a very different light, and it's put in a very different light to us, and of course we emphasise that.
If Madeleine hadn't been abducted, we'd never have thought of that comment again.
there is an awful lot of speculation. Now, whether any of it's true, we do not know equally, because a lot of these people do say very malicious things about them. Now, we don't know, because we don't know what goes on in their life, but this tapas group, I do find that I would say the fact that they weren't willing to cooperate says a lot about their moral compasses. They are lacking in a moral compass, all of them. And, they're lacking in moral standards and decency, that they left their children unattended. And it wasn't just the McCanns who left their children unattended. One must remember the other ones were doing the same thing. So they had a certain way of living. But yes, people can be badly behaved who are, living on a council estate. People who are the Duke of Westminster, he could be bad. He was badly behaved in certain regards. I loved the late Duke of Westminster, but he got caught with ladies of the night and all the rest. But people have different standards. As my father says, I've had a number of wives, and as it goes, 3 of them went. That's how life works. People do have differing moral compasses. Some people, the lady who lives 2 doors away likes to go to the beach and take all her clothes off, and she's about nearly 100, and it's not a very pleasant sight, I can tell you that. Some people like to do certain things. Other people like to, as one of my friends used to say, some people like apples, some people like pears, some people like apples and pears. That's probably how you have to judge people. But I would say that Dr. and Dr. McCann could have been better behaved by paying for a childcare system for their children, as could the other tapas people. And I think it's important to remind that the other people are just as bad. They should have been prosecuted, all of them. Prosecute the damn lot of them. They're all a pack of liars. They didn't answer the questions. They didn't help the police with the investigation. And then they tried to say, oh, the Portuguese are third world. Well, the Portuguese are not third world. Portugal is a lovely country. And how dare they insult the Portuguese? That's a very lowbrow thing. And that's why Goncalo Amaral was very successful in suing Dr. and Dr. McCann. Dr. McCann, put a sock in it, particularly her, because she was the one that was doing the suing. So there we go. The police probably had a problem with the language. There probably was a language barrier that could have been a problem between them all. There could have also been the we're being framed here because we're the tourists on holiday, and we've been. I'm sure a fair few people who were sat at that tapas bar would have probably said, "Oh, they were all drunk and they were disorderly or whatever." Because I'm sure they were living it up at that bar every night. They were known for not being exactly, they were on holiday. They were having a bit of freedom. I don't know what the kind word. That's the kindest way I can describe it. I think that the things that went on were clearly very, very strange, and it's not a good state of affairs that they were able to just sort of evade answering questions. I think it's a case that is a very tragic and sad state of affairs, and I do hope one day resolution is reached. I do hope a body is found, and I do hope everybody can come to some kind of closure. It's a bit like the Jean Bennett Ramsey case, where nothing has ever been really concluded, and it continues to fester. This is a nonsense that's gone on too long, but it is time for the British public to stop funding the British police. The Metropolitan Police should close down Operation Grange. Operation Grange has run its course. And as for the Germans, well, Walters has found nothing. Christian Brueckner will leave prison. Christian Brueckner will flee, and he will go and do nasty things somewhere else. And he will not end his days well, because I think there are a lot of people out there who don't like him, and he may find life not so easy this time because he's rather well known. But he is not the person they should be searching for. I don't think anyone will ever get the ending of this story. I think the ending of this story is sadly going to be like the Jack the Ripper story. You know, it's going to be surrounded by conspiracy nonsense forevermore. I do think that the likeliest thing that happened could be that, you know, the body of that child is somewhere where it will never be found. There were plenty of building sites there. Plenty of concrete could have gone over until the building is torn down. I think, you know, that could be a possibility. But that is just a stupid theory. I'm not saying that's the truth. Please don't quote me on that. But I will say that is my likeliest theory on what could have happened to whatever the body was, because, you know, if the body goes into the sea, bodies wash up out of the sea. It's, you know, but plenty of people go missing and are never found. So we will never know. I don't think we will ever know. It will be an amazing thing if we do know, and it will be an even more amazing thing if Madeleine McCann turns up alive. Madeleine McCann, in my view, is not alive. I will say that. I don't think a child with an eye condition of the type it had, when the Sun reward alone was 2.5 million, somebody would have traded it. Criminals are not loyal people. They betray one another. They do not have any loyalty to one another. And these kind of people, and the kind of people like Christian Brueckner who are accused, who has no evidence found against him yet. Now, it's possible they might find evidence still. They could try again. But for the moment, they have failed. So whether it was somebody of that type, or whether something else went on, or whether it was an accident, or whether, you know, goodness knows what happened,